Hi, I'm Karan.
Hi, I'm Divya.
And this week on Thinking, we're taking you back to Season 1, to Episode 8, where we first talked about AI and explored some of the ideas of how work might change with AI and what we thought the future would hold. Of course, we continued that conversation in Season 2 with the last episode of Season 2, Episode 10. And we'll be back in 2 weeks with the start of Season 3. So the notion that Seth Godin talks about took me a second. I was like, wait, who was it? Is that there? And he uses Mechanical Turk as an example, which is an Amazon service that lets you break up work into really small segments, right? And then people can go out and do that work for your company or whatever project that's outsourcing the work. And the thing he's talking about is how some jobs are going in that way that would take maybe if you're doing a translation, you would need a highly skilled translator to be able to translate a document, or using the example of like Wikipedia, right? Like you needed like all these researchers I think Encyclopedia Britannica had like 120 full-time staff, and it like is something like billions of dollars of man hours went into creating this encyclopedia. And then Wikipedia managed to carve the work into small chunks that then people could just do. So now you could disperse it out and, millions of people could do small amounts of it. Similarly with Mechanical Turk, right? You can get something translated. You're paying by the minute or maybe by the word or something, right? But you're being able to do something that was previously only available that type of work previously only went to people who were highly skilled. So I was thinking about it in other contexts. Like if you thought about Uber and like taxi driving at the system level, then you have transport as a service was previously something that was kind of done by a highly regulated environment, right? Like taxis are highly regulated, and that was because they were trying to make sure that people were safe, right? I'm speculating a little bit here, right? But now we're able to deliver that with technology that allows for people to kind of be safe. Solves the kind of needs that were leading to that regulated environment. But similarly, you're able to kind of break up the problem of having a system-wide transportation solution into small, discrete chunks that then can be done by a lot of different people. So with like an Uber sort of service, like individual people can help solve the kind of transportation service at a city level. So as I was thinking about that, then I was just trying to think about like what are the other things, what are the other waves that or other industries that this wave will now come into?
So I have actually some ideas around that.
Please.
So like a couple of weeks back, maybe last month or so, I got the invite to DALL-E 2, which is the AI image generating software,
I remember you telling
right?
me.
Like you tell it that a man dressed as an avocado at a football game, and it'll give you 4 images of exactly that. And you could tell it, 50 lens, close up shot, background, blah, blah, blah. And it'll like exactly make that thing. It's really quite incredible. And now because of that, so of course the art market was slightly under disruption because of NFTs for whatever their work. It was already under consideration of, okay, where is the future of art and where is the future of visual stuff going? And now because of AI generated art, and how interesting it is, like there is this almost surrealist quality to almost all of it.
Yeah.
Right? If you see that, or there is another software, I don't remember what it's called. Like that's also another one of wait, let me just check the name.
Well, I got served ads this morning for something called Jasper that apparently will write your marketing copy for you. I was getting ads on Instagram for it.
Yeah, the GPT-3, is that what
so.
It's called?
Yeah, I think so.
Right, like that. That has been. Yesterday I was talking to, like, I had a call with somebody who is working with like SMBs for their local SEOs, and stuff, and they were talking about how a lot of companies, like especially the marketing companies who do national or global level SEO now, they will use GPT-3 to generate content for website blogs.
Wow.
And it's so interesting, right? Like you don't have to pay anyone. You can just use that, like an AI to generate this thing. I had another friend who was, this couple, they were developing a software which could do text to voice very, very well.
Yeah.
And so well that you could give it a script and you could give it the intonation and all of those things that you want, and it would convert it. So you could have podcast episode even if you didn't want your own voice. Like you could choose the accent and you could choose the gender and the age and like, all of these specifications. And it's so interesting. Yeah, Stable Diffusion is the other software that I was talking about.
I was reading about it a couple of days ago.
And it's very interesting like how all of these softwares are coming up, especially as it almost to me feels like there was a point of time in the last decade where everybody was like Google Maps sucks, and then it transitioned into Google Maps is the only way people transport around the city. Like they do not know how else to get around, right? And like it was such a natural transition. You don't even realize when you stopped like looking at actual physical maps. Or like I remember when we had first moved to Delhi in like 2009, and my mom and dad used to have like a physical map when they were roaming around in the city, right? Like my mom would be telling my dad which road to take and which turn to take and all of that, because she had a actual map of the location. And now you can't even imagine that. Like I don't know if there would be anyone who would have purchased a map of Bangalore in the last 5 years, because a map of Bangalore exists on your phone.
Yeah. And I think to me, it's also interesting that now the next wave of that has started. Like for example, my dad was driving his boat last week, and my mom and I were talking about how when he started driving a boat like 10 years ago, there was always charts, right? And the charts were a big thing of it because you had to understand the tides, and you had to understand basically you need to understand the tides and then how it might affect where you could anchor and what the level of the water. It's all on the GPS, right? like there's and it's a really nice system. It has two screens that you can look at two different parts. Like you can zoom in on one and have zoomed out on the other. It's great, right? And then similarly, I was watching Apple's product announcement yesterday, and I noticed that with their new Apple Watch, they're really going after some of the more extreme use cases. So the new Apple Watch can be a dive computer, and they've partnered with this diving company to build a dive computer app. And it's interesting to me now how we're starting to see these kind of mainstream technologies really go after the really really specific use cases that used to be tackled by really only specialized equipment, and now it's like, oh well, why not, right? Like you can just, if you can do it, like why not be able to go after and show that this tool can also be used for this market? It's really interesting. I was telling Gaurav, because I'm like, I don't like that I have a dive computer, right? Like I use it twice a year. A dive computer is just a fancy name. It's a dive watch, right? Like they just call them dive computers or something. Okay. And the main thing it does is like when you're scuba diving, it tells you what depth you went to, and then based on what depth, how long you need to spend at lower depths to help reduce the nitrogen in your system before you come up. The danger is that if you come up too fast, the nitrogen can... Right? And it's like, well, it's, again, it was something that like when I learned to scuba dive in like 2000, I learned how to do it on paper and how you would calculate like, oh yes, if I go to this level, I need to wait at this level for 5 minutes before I come to the surface. And then, then you get to the point where you use a dive computer, but now it's like, well, I could just have my Apple Watch. Why should I spend $250 on this kind of specialized piece of equipment? Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that's to me, it feels like it's a similar technology wave, or it's part of the same technology wave. Yeah. But it's a different side of it than the kind of like labor replacement side.
Yeah, but like it to me, it's almost like, I think the place where I was coming from was more, if we look at this GPS or the dive computer use case that you're talking about, right? Like in front of our eyes, like we are living through a revolution almost. Like world is changing, and I can't really pinpoint the day when I switched to Google Maps as my source of truth about traveling in a city. But that is the case right now. And when I look at GPT-3 or when I look at AI generated art, that's what I feel. I just feel like, oh, you won't need somebody to generate actual artworks for you, because this is how you can instantly generate artworks. Like you don't need an illustrator. And if this is where they are today, where they would be in 5 years, we know that like AI grows exponentially.
Yeah. No, I was hanging out with some of my dad's friends who work at Microsoft last week, and it was just really interesting. So there's a tool called Copilot. Have you come across this? and it writes code for you when you're. It's basically a pair programmer that's an
Oh.
AI.
Yes. My sister was telling me about this, and she was like, "It is insanely amazing."
At least what I heard, I haven't seen it myself, but it's both like it will do syntax for you if it's a new programming language, but you can also comment like, "I need a function for this," and it will go write a
and
function.
it will write. Yes. Yeah.
So that
My sister was telling me about how, like, I think in a Unity program that she wrote, she used it, and it was very interesting. She just like, she told it to do something, and it just wrote a piece of code that did exactly that thing. And it's insane how awesome that is.
So apparently on GitHub projects where Copilot is being used, it's writing 40% of the code on average. This is what we were hearing last week.
Yeah.
And then my dad's friend was also talking about how you could, because his daughter's very into manga, and she was like, I really want to write one someday, but I don't think I could do the drawing. And it's like, well, this is a different world, right? Like now if you can write it, like something could generate the art for you, which is just they're interesting use cases. It kind of expands, it reduces the kind of technical barrier to do something, which I think is interesting. I think we'll see more waves of like innovation, maybe even of kinds of art, or people who feel enabled to be artists because they don't have the kind of barriers.
Yeah. I also like, there's so much interesting stuff within this to talk about, because like one could think about all of the cultural implications of somebody would say commoditizing it, but making it more accessible is also a fair way of saying it, right? Like, I mean, did Instagram commoditize photography? Sure. But like, actually good photographers didn't become, like professional photographers didn't become worse because of Instagram. I would say that the average person became a better photographer because they started taking so many photos and they started improving.
Yeah.
Like people 20 years ago probably wouldn't be so good at photography.
I definitely
on an average.
I mean, I wouldn't say it's so much. Well, I'd be interested in your thoughts, but I wouldn't say it's so much the output, which I guess is what I would call Instagram, and more the evolution in the input tools, right? Just the cameras have gotten better, and the software to support the cameras has gotten better. So now, like people, you don't have to understand bokeh to be able to take like a cool, I think what is the term, depth effect, right? Like, right? And and there's all these people who never would have, like my brother-in-law, like takes amazing photos with his iPhone, and he just would have never put in the time to kind of like learn about photography in that way. But now he doesn't have to, right? He just knows how to do a few of the things on his phone, and he can focus more on like framing. And I think absolutely, right? He's become much better at framing because of I guess you're right, Instagram, right? Because you start to see so much of photos in a certain style. That's kind of interesting. I wonder if that also pushes styles towards a certain kind of like place.
So I promise this is related. Okay. So do you know how, like when they do studies of how kids learn, the more a kid's parent speaks to them, like the more words a kid's parent speaks to them, the more faster the child learns the language and the better the child gets at the language.
Interesting. I know.
Did you know this?
A little bit of like the related. So one of my best friends teaches kindergarten, and so one of the predictors for her for success is how many words children know coming into kindergarten, right? And so like one of the big things she does is try to get them, to first grade, like just having expanded there, because those are the good predictors for future success, which I think is similar to what you're like a similar body of research to what you're talking about.
It is similar, but not exactly. So this is more, I think this was done more for like the class differences between different people. But basically, generally, you'll find that like people who are economically at a lower level, they generally would have single parent. That parent is probably working 3 jobs, probably not talking so much to the child. So the child starts off on a back foot almost, because the parent has not spoken so much to it. On the other hand, when a child has a lot of people speaking to them, they just pick up the language so much faster.
Interesting.
Right?
And because I guess you also have more variation. You get to see more people speaking the same words in different ways.
Yeah. Because like ultimately it is a neural network trying to learn and make sense of things. Right? So similar to I think that like that is how all human brain learn, right? Like everything that a human brain is trying to learn, they learn it in that particular way, which means that if you are shown a lot of quote unquote good images and you're given easy access to tools to take those images, and you can see what you are taking and compare it to the stuff, it becomes a lot easier. And that's why I said Instagram made it a lot easier. It's not just the cameras, it's not just the fact that iPhone had like, really good camera, and like nowadays the phones have amazing cameras. It's also that people see photos and they know, okay, this is what good photography looks like.
Yeah, that's interesting. Because if I think about like the Facebook era of like the late 2000s, it was a lot more crazy photos, right? Like people would like, it'd be like they'd be like doing crazy pictures, or like they would be like throwing like, it wasn't as much just beautiful photos. And I think part of that is like
Yeah.
Instagram knows what I like, so I get to see a lot more beautiful photos. But I do think you're
Yeah.
also, what you're saying is true, right? Because it gave people more of a place for feedback, for seeing similar photos, for seeing like this is the way that you could have taken it. And then you just start to learn and think.
You start to have a vocabulary for what this thing could be,
Yeah.
should be.
When we started this conversation, I was kind of wondering about like, is it semi-skilled work that's going to be replaced by this kind of like wave of automation? And now like this, as we've been talking, it's like, it feels more like it's almost like there's potential for new kinds of art, or at least like reducing technical burden to art. I don't know.
So I think that the metaphor that comes closest to my mind is maybe like 40 years ago, if you wanted to play music, you had to actually learn how to play an instrument. If you couldn't play a guitar, you could not make music. You could not play music. But if you today own an iPad or an iPhone, you have GarageBand. If you own a computer, you can find some free software that will let you quote unquote make music.
There's no equivalent though in music yet, right? Of these kind of AI generation softwares that we've been talking about that exist for imagery and
Sort of. I don't know how much. I think so there is this thing called Meta Sounds that Unreal has released with their newest version. I don't know if it is procedural generation or if it is AI generation. I'm not sure which one it is.
What is the difference?
But music is also happening.
What's the difference between those?
So AI,
go ahead.
AI is like you just give, generally AI generation is like you just give it a bunch of keywords and it will make something. Procedural is you'll tell it the rules that it has to follow.
Oh, I see. So one would be like, make something like Beethoven, but rap, right? And then it would figure something out. And then the other would be like, I need something in this certain key, like with this, like, I don't know, cadence, right? Okay, I see.
Yeah. Or even like more detail where like, okay, this is what the drum beat should be like. It should have this many instruments and stuff like that. I'm sure that like people are doing it for music as well. There is no reason why you couldn't do it.
Because there's so much data in the public domain, I was thinking, right? Like there's so many songs that are out there. Interesting.
And also like there is just so much possibility as well.
Yeah.
Right. So one of the interesting debates that has been happening has been what makes AI art separate from regular art. Right? Like if I draw something versus I ask the AI to make something, what's the difference? Like recently, one of my friends, she decided to publish a book of poetry, and she just went on Dali because she had an invite, and she chose a cover from there. Like she, gave it a bunch of keywords and she decided to pick a cover from there instead of asking someone to make it. Right. So I've just been thinking about like, how do you distinguish if somebody else had like drawn it for her? Well, what's the line?
I'm right in remembering, right, that most of the historical artists, they worked with people.
They did.
Right? So it's not like...
Yeah.
Like they always had someone who actually was executing the painting for them. Or even like, I know there's a very famous glassmaker out of Seattle named Dale Chihuly. And like I met some people who work in his studio and they're like, he's older. He's like, I think he's blind in one or both eyes. Right? It's like he can't be doing that much glasswork anymore. And so a lot of the stuff that's
Yeah.
coming out of his studio is being made by his assistants. But everyone still calls it Chihuly art. Like,
Yeah, it's like Sistine Chapel was not actually hand painted by Michelangelo.
yeah. So I don't know. To me, that feels like it's just a set of tools. It's not necessarily. I'm sure there was like in other eras where people are like, no, I don't know what came first. If it was like oil, and it probably was like oil, acrylic, and then tempera, right? Would kind of like, and I'm sure that there were similar sort of reactions where people were like, oh, how could you paint with tempura? Only real painting is oil painting.
I would imagine. So I would also think that like it, this might not be true, but this has been my observation that the appetite for entertainment has increased over the last few years. Like there are a lot more careers for entertainers.
I think it's a reaction to what we were actually talking about a few weeks ago, but that there's not a good getting into a flow state in your relaxation time is takes work, and we are, as a society, we've created so many things that don't easily let you go into a flow state during a relaxation time. Or let me say that a little differently. There's lots of things that you that are slightly satisfying. And then you don't end up going into find things that are more deeply satisfying because you're being slightly satisfied enough.
Interesting. Right.
So I wonder if that's creating more of this deeper demand where it's like people feel like there's unfulfilled, and now you're willing to go and spend things on, because I'm not satisfied by spending 25 minutes on Instagram every day. So I still have that need of like, I wanted something to entertain me. I wanted to see stuff that is visually exciting. And now I'm like going out and like filling it with something else. Like you keep eating like amuse-bouches or little appetizers, and then you're like, damn it, at some point I need a meal.
Oh, that's a very interesting way to put it. I was thinking that like it's just overall our demand from our time has increased so much that we often are doing more than one thing. Like, I'm driving, but I'm also like listening to audiobooks, or I'm listening to podcasts, or I'm like, doing my chores and then I'm listening to podcasts, or I would often be drawing and watching a YouTube video on the side or something like that, right? Like my attention is divided. So, which means that even if I'm doing, let's say, 8 hours of work, I am simultaneously also overlapping 5 hours of entertainment with that same time.
That's interesting. Because I wonder about, so if you compared to a much earlier time, right? Like if we were in a time where like you were still looking for securing your like shelter or something, right? Then it would be much more encompassing to be like, oh, I need to figure out where I'm going to sleep tonight, right? Like, there's not as much time or there's not as much brain space for non-essential activities.
Or maybe there is, like, I mean, that's a separate point. I don't know how I feel about assigning intent
That's very fair.
to how like foraging societies live.
Yeah, that's very fair. Fine. So maybe this was a bad example to go down, but the point I was trying to get at with the example was that I wonder about how much it's that you're being able to use like the system 1 versus system 2 part of your brain, right? So you're being able to kind of do it almost on autopilot, these things, because you've done them before. You've watched YouTube before, right? Like it's not going to be so startling to you. For example, like normally when I'm talking to you and when we have our calls and stuff, I might do something else at the same time, right? Where like just because I'll have had a thought or I'll have seen something, and so I'm like, yes, we're still talking, but I'll be doing something at the same time. But when I'm recording a podcast with you, it's not something super familiar with me, so it requires a lot more of my intention. I have to like, am I speaking at like staying close to the microphone? Am I speaking at a reasonably level volume? And so like more of those kind of like there's more processes involved in doing something new, because it's novel. Whereas I think a lot of the things are not novel anymore, right? Because we effectively do the same 25 things, over the course of a week.
Interesting. This is also making me think that like as some of these jobs get democratized,
Yeah.
not necessarily replaced, because I don't know if the demand is outpacing the supply or not. Like it could very well, like Instagrammer wasn't a job 10 years ago. YouTuber wasn't a job 10 years ago. Twitch, like, celebrity wasn't a job 10 years ago. Like,
Well, but I think
most,
all of those were jobs. Just the path to becoming successful in that career was not something so democratized, right? It wasn't Instagram or...
no, but,
Go ahead.
no, but like, people still do make shows. I think that more movies and more shows come out, even on a Hollywood level these days. Like, that market has also increased. But all of the tech entertainment is completely a brand new market, right? Like, it's not like conventional TV has gone away.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at the like ratings for TV shows, nobody watches the way they used to, right? Like, I think Grey's Anatomy, its second season or something, I remember looking this up. It was, I think, 30 million people watched like the prime time, and that was a time when the United States population was like 350 million, right? It was like 10% of the country was watching it.
Wow.
And now it's like 2 million is like a prime time like success.
That is a very interesting point.
There's just more options,
Okay, I'll take your point. That is fair. I was just thinking more from the perspective of there are more shows being made, there are more movies being released, and there are all of these other people. And everybody is spending much more time on entertainment than they used to before.
Yeah.
So maybe the supply, like, despite the fact, or maybe because of the fact that it's more democratized, there is more supply and there is more demand.
Interesting. I'm also wondering a little bit, like, and I'll draw a few blatant generalizations about history here, but I think like the printing press obviously made distribution of longer form things easier, right? And I imagine things like autocorrect and like all these little tools, editing tools, it just made it easier for you to write longer form things. So you didn't have to focus as much on the individual words, individual sentences. Yeah. So I wonder if these kind of supporting technologies we were talking about for generating, copy or for generating images, we'll start to see more composite creations or just like elaborate creations. And I wonder if we'll start to see that into the entertainment side as well. Because I don't think we'll get to a point that will be AI generated TV shows really fast, right? But we might have more AI generated pieces of them. And I wonder if that might be an interesting, I don't know. I wonder if there will be new genres that will start to pop up as we start to see more of that. Like today, I think.
I'm also.
Go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, well,
no, go ahead.
Okay, right. Well, I just like today. I think there's this profusion of reality TV, right, in different forms. There's reality TV for baking, and reality TV for obviously for dating, and 100 other different forms. I wonder if we'll start to, and why is that? I mean, it's cheap, it's unscripted. You get to people like to see people like them. Like it has all these ways that it resonates with people. But I wonder if we might start to see that kind of art form, particularly being elevated in a certain way because it's able to you're able to offload some of the burden of the entertainment to the technology, and that's being fully carried by the people themselves.
Oh, that's a very interesting thought. I wonder if that's $1 million idea. AI generated reality show.
AI supported or something, yeah.
No, that sounds like such an incredible idea. We should totally sell it to Netflix. We should be like, we originally came up with this thing and you should totally do this.
Don't you have some contacts in Netflix India? Maybe we can make it happen.
It would be really entertaining though.
Yeah. I'm also pretty interested by this music one. I'm curious why more people are not out there, because I feel like you also have good because there's rankings, right? There's Billboard rankings and there's purchase data and there's listen data. You would be able to actually get feedback into the model, which doesn't always exist.
But you wouldn't be able to use most of the music that is out there, right? Like popular music and all, you wouldn't be able to use for training your models.
Why not? Doesn't it all leave copyright after 50 years or 99 years? It's one of the...
Yeah, There was no music at that time.
I mean, there was.
Like, there was no recording. There was no recording.
It's 2023.
Right?
There was music in the 1970s.
No, 100 years, right?
I
1923.
would have to look. I'm not sure if it's 100 years. It might be.
It is 100
Is it really
years.
100 years? Okay.
It is 100
Okay, fine.
years.
Well, the 20s still had music, but yeah, that was big band, and I don't know what was happening in all parts of the world.
Yeah. Like, most of the times, like, they had music, but there weren't recordings which lasted till now, first of all. And second, like, even if you have open source music, there are a lot of places where they do have open source music. Like, I think the volume that these models need is insane, which is also super interesting. So I was watching this video about this person who tried to train an AI model to recognize faces
Okay.
and to recognize K-pop idols
Okay.
specifically. And the interesting thing is that most of these models are based off of white people faces.
Got it.
And so even despite her trying to train it, the model just would not
Wow.
recognize the people. Like, it just kept calling everyone the same person.
Wow, that is so interesting.
So, like, as we go into, GPT generated text, or we go into DALI generated artworks, what kind of stuff? Like, whose jobs get replaced and whose culture gets replaced?
Yeah. Because, like, I know the Dali one, I was reading about how if you type, like, a beautiful woman, it tends to show an unclothed woman because that's how Western media portrays women on the internet.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that crazy?
Oh, wow.
And it's like, you don't want to train on the internet, but you do have to train on the internet because the internet is the best data source to train from, but then the internet is very biased in certain ways.
Yeah. It's crazy. Wow, that is insane.
Yeah. So I think
Like,
because of stuff like that is showing up so early on, I feel like that will push us to be, at least from like wiping out, kind of like creating a general internet culture, I feel like that is less likely to happen because people are already starting to see these issues with the training sets. I don't know. Speculating.
very true. And I mean, I would assume that most of my friends who are from, like, Southeast Asian or South Asian countries, there used to be, like, especially when you were younger, there used to be this glorification of American pop culture.
Yeah.
Like, American music is the best, and American movies are the best, and American shows are the best. But, like, if I see just the general internet culture these days, it's not so much like Western, like, glorification of the West. There is some elements of West which are there, but, like, there are other elements where, because of the abundance of content online and because of the abundance of just access,
Yeah.
people are able to just say, no, I want my voice and I want representation. Like, it's just interesting to, I don't know how we arrived here, but, like, the way you said it, it just made me think about all of that.
Yeah. I mean, I think I sent you a voice note a week or so ago, but I had this kind of interesting notion. I wonder if, like, because we generate so much content in our lives, right? Like, I'll probably have taken, I think, 30,000 photos at this point in my life. So probably by the time I die, it will be, I don't know, 200,000 photos, right? And I was just thinking about, like, I wonder if there could be, like, a nonprofit or something that people could donate their digital content to that could be trying to create less biased training sets. Because I think part of what you're saying is true, right? Like, people, this stuff isn't copyright, certain stuff is in the public domain, and there are biases that exist because of that. But, like, I have a very close friend, Shweta, who we started a couple of companies together, and she and I have talked a lot about how she grew up in this part of Bangalore called Malleshwaram, and Malleshwaram has all these old stories that are just mostly captured in people, right? People know the stories of those areas, but there are photos, there are places, whatnot. But there's no real, like, she was like, I would love to, like, create a place that could be a repository for these stories, or a repository for this content and data. I think that even just trying to create the places that could be like repositories, even if we don't know what to curate from them yet, I'm very confident our abilities to curate are going to keep getting better and better with these technologies. But I feel like we
Hmm.
don't necessarily, we haven't put enough focus in saying what is the source data going to be, what's the training data going to be, and how can
Hmm.
there's certain places where I think like people still have to add value, and I think like stuff like Malaysia, like like this example of Malaysia of creating stories around local areas. It's hard today because that kind of data that it's getting lost in. I think the like there's so much content out there. What content actually
Hmm.
relates to this specific place? Can we create something that is from this kind of place or style?
Interesting. This is also making me think of, like, as you were talking about curation, right? Especially of the stories and local stuff. It's like, it's almost like art direction and curation, and bringing taste into the picture becomes the role of the human element, and the technology, like, does the rest of the work almost.
That's really
What am I
interesting.
trying to convey, and why am I trying to convey it, are the questions that the human needs to answer. And then the generation ends up being on the shoulders of the AI.
Interesting. That kind of reminds me about how you and I were talking to one of my friends who's a conservator a couple of weeks ago,
Yeah.
and it was interesting to hear about how exhibits happen in museums. It does seem like it's basically like there's one curator or someone who kind of has a very controlling ability, and they have a vision for it. And there's a lot of people who execute their vision, right? There's a lot of people like whose job it is to run around and make this floor
Very
into
true.
that. Yeah, so it's not that different today, right? Like maybe the AI would replace all of those 10 people whose job it is to take that curator's vision and execute it in reality.
It's also interesting to, like, as you said that, I was also thinking, it's interesting to think about when humans say, oh, the jobs are going to go to the robots. But, like, is that the kind of job that you want to be doing?
Correct.
So my brother, sister, and I, we were talking about some of these stuff recently, like AI generated art, AI generated code, and because we are artists or developers, where does that leave us in some ways, right? Like, people around us are having those conversations, and it's like, if somebody could replace a part of my job, please replace it, because if it's replaceable, then it's okay. Just replace it. I would rather do the stuff that is irreplaceable, but I don't know if that's coming from, like, a position of extreme privilege in some sense or not.
I think a lot of things get standardized over time,
Hmm.
right? And as they get standardized, I don't know whether to say it's like the fun goes out of it or the art goes out of it, but like for
Hmm.
example, like there was a time that I kind of enjoyed writing Facebook ads, right? And it was about I guess maybe like 7-8 years ago, and it was just like it was fun, right? Because you could kind of like think about it. There was a lot more just like I don't know, I would say kind of like art to it, right? But now it's like what you should do is you should be just like creating like so you have a certain set of images, you have a certain set of copy, and you create all the iterations of them, right? See which ones work, and then once you know like what is the kind of direction for the imagery, then you try another set of 5 images with the copy, right? And you keep just winning and steadily iterating in a way that's right for your audience. That's just not as fun. Right? Like it's a different kind of
Yeah.
skill set. It's much more like I have a good friend who I play games with, and we play this game called Stellaris, and he loves to call it that it's a spreadsheet game, right? What is it doing? It's a fancy UI for spreadsheets. You're just moving stuff around in spreadsheets. um, so I think jobs that are spreadsheet jobs, right, are just not that fun at some point. And nothing wrong with accountants, but,
Yeah. It's also very interesting to think about, like, as people move into this direction, as the culture moves into that direction, how do people perceive their job, right? Like, do we want to be doing repetitive stuff? Do we want to be, like, developing skills which are just repetitive stuff?
I think I met some people during my so far in my career, especially when I was running the company in India, that they kind of wanted you to tell them what to do, and I think maybe it was like that they didn't have the mind space available for work right then. Maybe they had a lot of things going on in their personal life. Maybe they were trying to do something else with their life, and this job was kind of just like a way to make ends meet. But it's an interesting thing because I interpreted that And the way I kind of internalized that was I was like, hey, okay, Karan, you have the ability to kind of create opportunity for people that will give them a sense of purpose. Like, what higher calling can there be to that, than that, right? Like that you're being able to kind of create something that will tell people what to do, who want to, right? Who will tell people what to do in a way that is, you know, at least to the best of your abilities, like useful for them, for society, for whatever, right? It's helping the greater good. I don't know. So I'm kind of curious of your thoughts. Like, if you feel like there will be, and I think as we kind of started talking about something Seth Godin talks about in his book Lynchpins, he's like saying you can either be a person that people are telling you what to do, or you can be a person who just be a genius at something. He loves to use that word kind of genius a lot.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's kind of like you're saying, it's an interesting place. I think it's an interesting place even as we kind of think about as entrepreneurs and as we're starting a company, like what will success look like, and what are the kind of interim successes, and should we like think about creating that kind of work, or looking at places where we've created repetitive work and say, hey, you know, is that a success for our business, or is that not a success because we're creating jobs that are not good jobs, or jobs that we think of as not being good jobs?
Oh, I just had this thought. So industrialization made repetitive work happen,
Correct. Yeah.
right? Like, because industries needed repetitive work.
Yeah.
And it's almost like, I don't know how right this is, because like my brain just connected those dots right now. And it's almost like now in the world of extreme personalization, we don't want repetitiveness. So we are almost fighting against that. I guess like there's like a tidal wave coming from one side and crashing into what existed long before.
Yeah, you're exactly right.
And it's like people, like from childhood, people expect to do a certain kind of work, and that's why they are sent to school, and everybody's given the same education because they want to be doing the same work. But like most of my friends who graduated from college are not doing the kind of jobs that they thought that they would be doing when they graduated 10 years ago. Like, many of these jobs didn't exist. Many of them have constructed their own jobs. What I am doing did not exist in the way that I am doing it 10 years ago. Definitely not in India. What my brother is doing definitely didn't exist. My sister is making something on VR. VR was not a thing. Like, it's so interesting.
Yeah. It's really interesting. I mean, I think an interesting point that maybe we can talk about in a future week is how the education system is. I think part of the reason why so many people have failed, so many startups are failing in going after ed tech and changing the education space. My dad is very deep into the education space, and he's very fond of saying that if you put a teacher from 150 years ago into a classroom of today, they would have literally no problem. But if you put a doctor from 150 years ago or any other kind of, right, they would have no idea what they were doing. But a teacher, it's like, it's still, maybe it's it's a whiteboard instead of a blackboard, right? But like, and I think it's because of what you were just saying. It's because the system, society is looking to reward people for individuality and for kind of like shining in their bright personhood or whatever. And our schooling is not about that. Our schooling is about trying to make people standardized. And I think part of why there's such a discrepancy and why we're struggling so much in trying to solve this problem is because it's not actually solving education the way it's needed. It's like solving like preparation for life. But education is not really doing that right now. It's like doing things that are orthogonal but kind of related.
Very true.
We can talk about it in a future week.
Oh, we should definitely talk about this next week. This is such an interesting... I feel like this is the first time when we have arrived at another concrete topic from a topic. I love it.
I love it too.
Awesome.
This was a good talk.
Then we should continue. Yeah, this was awesome. Okay, we should talk about it next week.
We'll talk about it next week. Okay.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks for listening to this episode of Thinking on Thinking. Our theme music is by Steve Combs.
If you found any of the topics we talked about interesting this week, we'd invite you to get in touch with us. We'd love to invite you on the podcast or just have a conversation about how these topics apply in your business and in the decisions and problems that you're struggling with. You can get in touch with us on our website, joyous.studio, or by reaching out to Divya or me, Karan, directly.